The crack of her palm against my cheek was a sound I hadn't heard since I was a child who'd stolen sugar cubes from the pantry. But this wasn't a parent's swift discipline. This was the cold, deliberate strike of my daughter-in-law, Sabrina, her eyes glittering with a venomous rage over a puddle of spilled vichyssoise on her designer tablecloth. The soup, a creamy swirl of leek and potato, was now a pale, spreading stain, a testament to the tremor in my hand that arthritis had gifted me. But the true shock wasn't the sting blooming across my skin. It was the silence that followed it, the deafening, cavernous silence of my son, Julian, who stood frozen by the sink, his back to me. He didn't gasp. He didn't turn. He didn't demand to know what in God's name she thought she was doing. He simply polished a wineglass, his reflection a distorted mask in the crystal. In that single, echoing moment, I understood. He would not defend me, not from this, not from anything. It was in that silence that I remembered the words I'd heard them whispering from the living room just last week, their voices like the rustle of snakes in dry leaves. "She's dead weight, Julian," Sabrina had hissed, the words sharp enough to cut glass. "She just sits in that chair by the window, taking up space. She contributes nothing." "She's my mother," he'd mumbled, his voice lacking any conviction. "That's not the point," she'd snapped back. "The point is, we're drowning, and she's an anchor, a beautifully useless, expensive anchor." Dead weight. The words hadn't just stung. They had burrowed into my bones. And now, the slap was the punctuation mark at the end of that cruel sentence. Then came a new sound, the click of the front door opening and the soft thud of a suitcase dropped on the hardwood floor. "Mom?" It was Cordelia's voice. My Cora. My youngest, the one I hadn't laid eyes on in over a year, not since she'd moved 1,000 miles away with a man who promised her the world and gave her a cage. She stood on the threshold of the dining room, her face a canvas of shock. I knew she had just come from signing her divorce papers. She'd called me 3 days ago, her voice so broken by sobs she could barely form words. Her gaze swept the scene, the overturned soup bowl, the glint of tears in my eyes, the blooming red handprint on my cheek. She saw the way I was holding myself, a fragile vase trying desperately not to shatter. Then her eyes landed on Sabrina, who was still glaring at me, her hand still raised slightly, as if contemplating a second strike. Cora didn't hesitate. She moved with a speed I hadn't seen in her since she was a teenager. The slap that followed was not a sting. It was a thunderclap. It echoed through the sterile, silent house, a sound of pure, undiluted fury. Sabrina staggered back, her face a mask of disbelief, one hand flying to her own cheek. "You touch my mother again," Cora said, her voice a low, lethal growl that promised violence. "And I will break both of your hands." Julian finally spun around. "What the hell, Cora? You don't live here. You don't get to storm in here and act like some vigilante." Cora turned to him slowly, her eyes burning with a righteous fire. "And you? You let your wife hit our mother and said nothing. You let her call Mom a burden and just stood there like the coward you've always been." "She's not helping us," Julian shouted, his face contorting with a rage born of shame. "She just takes up space, just like you. A divorced parasite who comes running back to Mommy the second life gets a little hard." He spat the words at her, each one a poisoned dart. "You're just like her, both of you useless." Cora recoiled as if he'd slapped her too. The fire in her eyes flickered, replaced by a deep, familiar hurt. That's when I found my voice. I stepped between my 2 children, my shadow falling over the spilled soup on the floor. "Enough," I said. The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. They both froze, their anger momentarily extinguished by the sheer finality in my tone. I looked at my daughter, my brave, broken Cora. "You're not useless," I said softly, my heart aching for her. Then I turned my gaze to my son, the boy whose baby pictures still sat on my nightstand, the boy whose future I had mortgaged my own to secure. "And you," I said, the words falling like chips of ice into the silence, "are no longer my son." His mouth fell open, a fish gasping for air. No sound came out. I didn't wait for one. I turned my back on them both, walked to my chair by the window, the one they said I stared out of like a ghost, and sat down. But I wasn't a ghost. I was flesh and bone and beating heart. And I was, finally, irrevocably done. There was a time I believed that giving was a currency for love, that the more you sacrificed, the more you would be cherished in return. I believed that loyalty, paid forward in quiet, selfless acts, would one day be repaid in warmth and security. I built my life on that faulty foundation. I sold my house to help Julian buy his. It wasn't a mansion, just a small, sturdy colonial in the Hudson Valley that I had lived in since he was a boy. The porch paint was peeling and the ancient boiler groaned like a dying beast in winter, but it was mine. Bought and paid for with every graveyard shift I'd worked as a nurse, every penny I'd saved by mending my own clothes and foregoing vacations. That house had seen me through widowhood after my David passed, through Julian's chaotic college years, through the loneliest winters of my life. Its walls held the echoes of laughter and the ghosts of lullabies. My name and David's, with Julian's messy fourth-grade scrawl beneath it, were carved into a pantry beam, a family tree etched in wood. When he and Sabrina were expecting their second child, Chloe, they came to me with blueprints and hopeful eyes. "There's this perfect house, Mom," Julian had said, his voice brimming with manufactured excitement. "It's in Syracuse, great schools, a big yard, room for everyone, but we're just a little short on the down payment." I didn't hesitate, I didn't even blink. "How much do you need?" They named a sum that made my breath catch, but I simply nodded. I wired the money within a week, the entire proceeds from the sale of my home. I didn't ask to be put on the deed. I didn't want them to feel burdened by the magnitude of the gift. "It's a home for my grandchildren," I told myself. "They'll understand what this means. They'll know." They didn't. I moved into their guest room, a windowless box in the basement, tucked between the laundry room and the garage. A mattress on a metal frame. I told myself it was fine. I was near my grandchildren. I could help. I could belong. And I did help. More than they would ever admit, I became their unpaid, live-in nanny. I handled school pickups and drop-offs, soothed fevers, and chased away nightmares, supervised homework, and sang bedtime songs. I cooked dinner most nights, washed their clothes, and sewed buttons onto Sabrina's expensive blouses. I never asked for a dime. Then, one afternoon, I found an envelope on the granite countertop marked "Final Notice" in stark red letters. It was the mortgage. When I asked Julian about it, he just shrugged, a flush creeping up his neck. "Sabrina had to cut back her hours at the firm. Things are just tight right now." So I paid it, quietly. I went to their bank the next day and arranged a direct monthly payment from my pension account to cover half their mortgage. I never told them. I didn't want to embarrass my son. He was my son. For 3 years, the money flowed from my account to theirs, and they never asked. They never questioned how they were suddenly staying afloat. Maybe they just assumed the universe had provided, or maybe they simply didn't care enough to wonder. Sabrina's attitude toward me eroded slowly, like a shoreline under a relentless tide. At first it was small things, an eye roll when I suggested a recipe, a sharp correction when I told the children stories about their grandfather. "Mom, don't confuse them with all that old-fashioned stuff," she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension. "They're learning a different way now." Then it became more overt. "We really need more space," she said one day, glaring at the grandchildren's toys scattered across the living room floor. "If this guest room were free, we could turn it into a proper playroom." She was talking about my room, my home. I overheard her on the phone with a friend. "No, she doesn't pay rent, but God, the cost adds up. She eats, she uses water, electricity." And once, while handing me a grocery list, she added, "It would be nice if you started picking up your own things. I mean, you do eat an awful lot of Greek yogurt." Each comment was a small, sharp stone thrown at my dignity. I would look to Julian, searching his face for a flicker of support, a silent apology. But he would just find something incredibly interesting on his phone or stare intently out the window at the bleak, gray Syracuse sky. He had perfected the art of looking away. Still, I tried. I baked her favorite lemon poppy seed bread, even after she called my family recipes dated. I folded her laundry when she let it sour in the machine for days. I kept giving, believing that my utility would eventually be mistaken for love. She never said thank you. The only time she acknowledged my presence was to remind me, "You're lucky we have space for you. Not every family would do this." She said it as if the 6-figure check I wrote, the thousands of hours of childcare, the 3 years of mortgage payments were all just a favor I should be eternally grateful for. And Julian, my sweet boy, who once built me birthday cards out of macaroni and glitter, just stood beside her, nodding in silent agreement. The moment her hand struck my face over that spilled soup, something inside me didn't break. It solidified. It hardened from a molten core of grief and disappointment into something cold, clear, and unbreakable. Resolve. And that resolve would lead me to do something I never thought I had the strength to do. I called the bank on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't raise my voice. I sat on the edge of my bed in the windowless room, the phone pressed to my ear, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. I simply confirmed what I already knew, that my name was still listed as a recurring payee on the monthly mortgage, even though I was not on the deed. The woman on the other end of the line was polite. "Yes, Mrs. Vance, it looks like you've been making partial payments since August of 2022, and there was a substantial lump sum payment last December as well." "That's correct," I said. "And would you like to continue these payments, ma'am?" A small, quiet smile touched my lips. "No," I said. "I'd like to stop them, effective today." There was a beat of silence on the line. "Oh. All right. I would also like all future communications," I continued, my voice unwavering. "The remaining balance, the payment schedule, and every financial document going forward to be redirected solely to the homeowners of record, Julian and Sabrina Vance." The representative paused. "Of course, Mrs. Vance. I can finalize that request for you right now." "Please do," I said. "And email me a confirmation of the cancellation and the redirection of correspondence." I hung up. 2 hours later, a formal email from the bank arrived. I opened my laptop, printed the letter, and folded it neatly. I slid it into a plain white envelope along with the final receipt of my last payment. That evening I made dinner. Pot roast, slow-cooked with carrots and thyme, Julian's favorite from when he was a boy. I baked rosemary bread. I set the table with the good china they never used. And in the very center of the table, next to the salt shaker, I placed the white envelope. They came home late, bickering in low tones as they walked through the door. Sabrina dropped her briefcase on the floor with a thud. Julian was already scrolling through his phone. Dinner was a tense, silent affair, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware against porcelain. When the plates were nearly empty, I reached out, my hand no longer trembling, and slid the envelope to the center of the table. "What's that?" Sabrina asked, not bothering to look up. I wiped my lips with my napkin. "That," I said, my voice clear and calm, is the last mortgage payment I will ever make for this house." She blinked, her fork hovering midair. "Excuse me?" I met her gaze directly. "I called the bank this morning. I instructed them to send all future bills, notices, and financial responsibilities to the legal homeowners, to you two. From this day forward, this house is entirely your burden." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she was speechless. Julian finally looked up from his plate, his face paling. "Mom, what—" "I heard you, Julian," I said, turning to him. "Last week, in the living room." Then I looked back at Sabrina. "You said I was dead weight, and you were right. It's a terrible feeling. So now, I'm removing the weight." Julian's face went from pale to a deep blotchy red. We didn't mean— "I have paid for this house for 3 years," I continued, my voice gathering strength. "I gave you the down payment from my own home. I've covered half the mortgage. I've bought your groceries, cooked your meals, and raised your children while you built your careers. I stayed quiet when you rolled your eyes, and I looked away when you grew cold." I reached down and lifted my small, packed suitcase from beside my chair, setting it upright on the floor. "But the giver is done giving." Sabrina shot to her feet, her voice high and shrill. "You can't just leave. What about the kids? You can't just drop this on us." "I can," I said simply, "and I am." Julian looked like a boy again, caught in a lie he couldn't talk his way out of. Tears welled in his eyes. "Mom, please, let's just talk about this." I looked at the man my son had become. "You let her slap me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You stood by and let her humiliate me. And when your sister, your own sister, defended me, you called her trash. You chose your side every single time, Julian, even when you knew it was wrong." The tears spilled over, tracing paths through his shame. "I'll be gone before you wake up," I said, rising from my chair. "You'll finally have your playroom. Do what you like with it." "Where will you go?" he whispered, the question laced with panic. I allowed myself one last small smile. "Somewhere I'm not dead weight." I wheeled my suitcase to the bottom of the stairs and walked up to my room one last time to gather the few things that were truly mine: a handful of sweaters, a worn photo album, and my late husband's wristwatch. That night, for the first time in years, I slept like a stone, and there was no weight on my chest at all. In the pre-dawn darkness, I brewed one last cup of coffee in their gleaming, silent kitchen. I placed my key on the granite countertop. No note, no dramatic farewell. The click of the door closing behind me was the only goodbye they would get. I rolled my small suitcase down the frost-heaved sidewalk, the wheels a soft percussion in the quiet of the sleeping suburb. The 5:40 a.m. Greyhound bus was a lifeline. Its vinyl seats were cracked with age, and the air was stale, but it was headed south, away. As the gray industrial landscape of upstate New York blurred and faded behind me, I didn't cry. There was nothing left to grieve. And I was leaving a house, not a home. I rode through the sleepy hills of Pennsylvania, into the warmer breath of the South, and finally into the vast, open expanse of the West. I was headed to Santa Fe, where Cora had gone to lick her wounds. She'd fled there a month ago with nothing but 2 boxes and a bruised heart. When I stepped off the bus in New Mexico, the air felt different. It was thin and sharp and smelled of dust and juniper. The sunlight wasn't the pale, watery light of the east. It was a bold, brilliant gold that seemed to burn away shadows. Cora was waiting for me. She looked thinner, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but when she saw me, a fragile smile bloomed on her face. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. We didn't speak at first. We just looked at each other. 2 women worn thin from being quiet for too long. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a polite hug. It was a desperate, clinging embrace, the kind you only give when something deep inside you has finally broken open. I held her, my daughter, and felt the tremors running through her. We didn't need to explain anything. We knew. We had both survived houses where love came with conditions, where silence was mistaken for peace. Her apartment was a tiny one-bedroom adobe with second-hand furniture and an air conditioner that rattled a protest against the afternoon heat. But it was clean, and the light that poured through the window was beautiful. "I was just making tea," she said, her voice raspy. I nodded and sat at her small kitchen table. She placed a steaming mug in front of me, her hand covering mine for a moment. And we just sat like that in the quiet, sun-drenched kitchen, no justifications, no recriminations, just two women who had finally, after a long and painful journey, come home to each other. The first few weeks, we moved around each other in a quiet ballet of healing. Cora flinched whenever her phone buzzed. She spoke in whispers. One night, as rain tapped against the window pane, she finally gave voice to the bruises I couldn't see. "He called me garbage," she whispered, staring at the floor. "Not just when we fought, all the time. When I forgot something at the store. When I spoke too softly. When I breathed wrong." Her knuckles were white. "He told me that if I ever left, no one would want me. That even my own mother wouldn't want me back." She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying question. "Was he right, Mom?" My throat tightened. I took her cold, trembling hand. "He was wrong," I said, my voice fierce. "He was always wrong. The dam broke." She sobbed into my lap like a child, and I stroked her hair, just as I had when she was 5 and afraid of thunder. When her tears subsided, I said softly, "We are not starting over, Cora. We are picking up where they tried to end us." Something shifted in her after that. She began to walk a little straighter. She started working with silver again, a passion she'd abandoned years ago. We found a slightly larger apartment to rent, a place above an art gallery with a small balcony that overlooked the street. We didn't have much, but every piece of furniture was chosen by us. Every cup and plate was ours. We started a small online business. I baked breads and cookies with local flavors, blue corn, piñón, a hint of chile. Cora sold her delicate, hand-hammered silver jewelry. We called our little venture Vance's Daughter. Each sale felt like a small act of defiance. My son called, eventually. Months later, it was a Tuesday. I saw the Syracuse area code and let it go to voicemail. Then Cora's phone buzzed. It was Chloe, my granddaughter. Her voice was a tiny, frightened whisper. "Grandma, Mom and Dad they're scared. The bank sent a foreclosure letter. Daddy said they're going to lose the house." There was a pause. "He said it was your house first." Then the phone was handed off. "Mom," it was Julian's voice, broken and hollow. "I'm sorry. I was stupid. I was a coward. We need help. They're going to take the house. Clara, she has debts. Gambling. It's all falling apart. Please, come back. We can make space for you." I took a deep breath, looking around our little sunlit apartment, which smelled of lavender and baking bread. "Michael," I said gently, "do you remember the day Sabrina called me dead weight?" A choked sob on the other end. "Yes." "Do you remember what you did?" Silence. "Nothing," I answered for him. "You did nothing. You exist in my memory of that day as a ghost. And now you call because the bank remembers I exist too. I was a burden to you then, Julian, but I'm not anymore." I paused, letting the words settle. "I used to carry that house. Now I carry myself." "What do I tell the kids?" He wept. "And tell them their grandmother is doing just fine. I said, and a real, genuine smile touched my lips. And maybe one day, when they're grown, they'll understand what you didn't. Then I hung up. Cora looked at me, her eyes clear. She opened her phone, blocked the number, and set it down. We didn't need to discuss it. We had learned to swim, and we were not going back for the ones who had tried to drown us. A letter arrived from Chloe a week later. "I miss your hugs," it read. "I miss the smell of your cookies." It was written in a child's shaky crayon, with a drawing of two stick figures holding hands. I cried when I read it, not from sorrow or regret, but from release. Grief says, "I miss what I loved." Guilt says, "I should have stayed." That night, I finally set the guilt down. I wrote back to her. I told her I missed her too. I told her about the pushy seagulls and the way the desert smells after it rains. I enclosed a small pressed desert marigold. I didn't mention the house or her parents. That was not her burden to carry. Children deserve to feel wanted, not wedged between the shame and silence of adults. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into the corners of other people's lives, convinced that being needed was the same as being loved. It is not. Love doesn't leave bruises, visible or otherwise. It doesn't call you names in the dark. It doesn't watch, silent, as you are diminished. Love sees you. Love speaks for you. Love stays. Now, I walk in the sun with my daughter beside me, and not a single one of our steps is quiet. We are loud in our living, in our healing. We take road trips with old paper maps, searching for beauty in forgotten places. Cora sketches sunsets. I fill journals with words, not of what we lost, but of who we have become. We are not survivors. We are architects, rebuilding our lives on a new foundation of our own making. I am not a burden. I never was. And if anyone says otherwise, I know now that is their weight to carry, not mine.